Hi, I'm Bryson Bort. I'm the founder and CEO of SCYTHE, bringing to you our second annual Founders Panel. Last year's was such a disaster, we figured we'd do it again. So let's start off with each of you introducing yourselves, what your company does.
I'll start. Anthony Johnson. Company's name is Delve Risk, and we do market research to enable sales and marketing teams.
My name is Mollie Breen, and I am the CEO and founder of Perygee, and we are an IoT and OT cybersecurity company.
I am Matt Devost, and I am the CEO of OODA LLC, and we are a general advisory and consulting firm.
Okay, so the way we do this panel is you've probably seen a number of panels, and they really kind of fall into two camps. The first is the classic, here's how you write a pitch deck. These are the 5 things that need to be in it, and this is how you raise money to destroy your life. Then, if you manage to survive and get to the end, hey, I IPO'd, I sold, I exited, and kind of the secrets in cybersecurity is there's kind of no bad exit as from a founder perspective. And we're going to talk some of that about risk, but then you get the look at what a genius I am and just do what I did. Nobody talks about the middle. That first time you close and you launch, you're in the honeymoon. Then the rest of it is the long, lonely slog in the wilderness. So that's a lot of what we're going to be going through. So let's start off with what do you think are the key qualities to be a founder, right? So we're going to go into the wilderness. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to continue to be in a very lonely position because there are very few people, family, friends, people in the workforce who understand what we go through. So what do you think it takes to be a founder, Anthony?
I think I would sum it up with the distinction between some people want to win because they want to win, and some people want to win because they just refuse to lose. I think you, as a founder, it's important to have enough of you just refuse to lose. Because it's really insane what you're kind of faced with once you kind of get into the middle. So I think you could sum it up as grit, but I think that tenacity of no, I'm not gonna give up. I'm gonna see this thing through. Because if you're optimistic, I don't think optimism's enough.
That's exactly, my mind went somewhere really similar where a lot of startup textbooks would teach to failing fast. But I've always had a hard time appreciating that because of just the refusing to fail mentality that I think comes with being a founder. Just to pull from example that came from this past year of being in the messy middle, the whole SVB crisis, people, the headlines were pretty jarring, and there were businesses that really struggled, but there was also this sense of even if we were to lose everything tomorrow, all of the money, you'd still have your sense of self and you'd still have a vision and a mission. I feel like that goes back to that grit capacity and that element of just you're still going to keep doing it even if all the resources were to go away. And sometimes resources are money, sometimes resources are customers, sometimes it's product, and being able to push through it.
Cool. I won't repeat. Those are great responses as well. I think for me, though, especially as a bootstrap entrepreneur through my career, it really is about taking risks, so being a risk taker, but doing that in a way where you apply a kind of a stoic mindset so that you're able to navigate the highs and the lows and kind of keep steady. My employees used to refer to it as the Devost zone. We'd be in some sort of crisis. I'd just walk in the room and calm things down and it is not the end of the world. So that ability to realize that when you're in the lows, it isn't a disaster. When you're in the highs, you still need to be preparing for the next dip, I think was an important factor for me.
So the way I look at it is I think there's 2 qualities. First is passion, because I think if you're going to go down this journey, and clearly we're going to spend some time here talking about how hard it is, you have to be passionate about the idea. You do not start a company to make money. If your goal is to make money, go to Wall Street, right? And so the way I described it is there has to be an idea that is in your head that the itch that it does not exist in the world both astonishes you at the stupidity of humanity and just drives you crazy that it doesn't exist. The second part, tolerance for bullshit, right? I think that kind of ties to the stoic attitude because anything and everything will go wrong. We work in a technical field, but it's the people that are the hard part. Right? People are the capability of your company, people are your customers, people are your competitors, people are all around you. And it includes the fact that as the CEO of this newly minted startup, You're going to learn things that you know, as a smaller startup, you don't have an HR team. So guess who learns health insurance? You get to learn health insurance because who else is going to do that for you? The administrative, the mundane, you are the CEO, you are the janitor. The toilets only get cleaned if you get on your knees and you clean them. That is that tolerance to keep it going, which is probably kind of a combination of the stoic and the grit that you're talking about. So we're going to come back to SVB because I think that's going to be an example of disaster that we all got to experience in different levels of a stoicism. But let's start with, what do you think, you know, what's a clean example that jumps to your mind of the first big mistake or the biggest challenge you ever had? Where the grit really was required?
Want me to go first?
Yeah. Just keep it easy. We're simple
Yeah.
people.
The first big mistake. I actually didn't know what we were going to build and do at first when I started the company, right? I actually looked at the space and I was like, this is broken, this doesn't make any sense, I can do something. And I think I actually went in thinking, maybe the mistake is this, I thought I knew the problem, and I had no fucking clue what the problem was, right? Like, I was like, oh, this is the thing. And then as I was talking to sales and marketing team leaders, they're like, no, this is the problem. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. So I had to like toss out my assumptions. And in my career, I was a CISO, and I relied on a lot of assumptions of understanding things. And so I would say that was probably my first big mistake. Like, I assumed that I knew what the problem was.
But how did that trip you up? I mean, you clearly went in with the mindset of I'm going to learn. So
well, I got to the mindset of I'm going to learn because stuff didn't make sense. Like, it was like I was having conversations with people that were way harder than they should have been, right? And it's because, again, I thought or I assumed I understood what their problems were. I thought I assumed and understood, the issue. So I would come in guns blazing. We can do this, 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 and this, and then I'm like, no, that's not. So that blew me up probably about 4 or 5 months. So after 4 or 5 months of lumps, figured it out.
Man, where my mind goes, because it's hard to think of when you make so many mistakes, it's hard to think of which ones. Where my mind is going is, let's just go to what are the times you've cried, and then what are those times? And I am actually happy to report I've only cried maybe 4 or 5 times this entire journey, and every time I take a selfie, because it's kind of fun to memorialize it in some ways and look back on it. So
hold on, you
I
take
love
selfies
that.
of you crying?
yeah, I take a little selfie, and it's normally I'm taking a selfie because I'm sending it to a founder, being like, look how depressing and sad and lonely this is. So it's usually not for my own benefit, but it does live in your camera roll, and then you can go look at it. But for whatever reason, for whatever reason, I'm thinking of this like one Thursday night where we had a big demo the next morning with some lead, and it just for whatever I was really trying to boil the whole ocean and get the product exactly right for this big demo, and was just realizing that I didn't know everything about our product as much as like my product team would, and that was sort of an inhibitor, and then there was an element of just like there was a lot of in our roadmap that I was trying to gloss over and like couldn't exactly get there to be able to help tell the story the next day. I probably wasted, let's just say 3 or 4 hours of trying to boil the ocean on this demo, and then completely reverted and just told the story that we had been telling, and it went over really well. And I think there was a learning in terms of, we're gonna get into the loneliness aspect, and we're gonna get into the people aspect, but there was definitely a learning of how do you empower your team sometimes to help you and like share in the loneliness and share a little bit in the burden and like pull them in, maybe not at 10 p.m. at night because that would be rude, but like in that journey of this demo. And then there's also an element of we're doing really exciting things, and I think sometimes it's tempting to want to be a perfectionist and get all the way there with every single person. But there's also an element of, I think if you just tell your story, that's also inspirational enough. And if you and not needing to do everything. But I don't know. I could probably open up my camera roll and find a few other mistakes. So that would work here.
So you already have the interior decorating for your future office when you
Yeah.
grow
You
up.
gotta
It's
have
going to be
collage.
just the pictures
It's
of you
just the
crying
pictures.
around.
Exactly.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah.
A mat.
I think for me, you get outside the tactical mistakes. I think strategically the biggest mistakes I made over time were around trust. And I think they were mistakes that I would make again because I inherently want to trust people. So where I had the biggest trip ups where you trusted that somebody was on the same journey, whether it's a partner or somebody that you bring in, you're trusting that their ethics are aligned with yours and they're not. And that created some of the most difficult circumstances that I had to deal with as an entrepreneur. Early on, one, it caused me to exit the company that I'd helped found initially out the gate because my ethics were not aligned with the other members of the leadership team. And that was a tough decision because I just built this thing. I loved it. We were breaking new ground. We were creating products that had never existed. But I learned a lot about myself and the lines that I was willing to draw in that process. And then later, the TRC had a couple similar experiences where you trust a business partner, you feel like they're aligned. Next thing you know, there's some sort of lawsuit, and you're spending time, and it's a distraction and a lot of stress. So I think that some of the biggest challenges that I've encountered is where I went into a relationship with a very trusting perspective and then got burned by that. But I think by way of human nature, and I always tell this to my wife as well, because she has a much better sense of people's character than I do. I always want to trust people out the gate. That's like how I'm wired by design. So I think it's like a self-inflicted, over time I'll continue trusting people because I realize, okay, until they violate that trust, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because I don't want to be the type of person that goes through life not trusting people.
So I'm going to follow yours, and because I've also started 2 companies, and I've made a big mistake in each one. The consulting company, I thought that the hard part was getting the work and executing the work. I didn't realize the hard part is getting paid for the work. Nobody pays you on time.
100%.
You're like, I came in, I did a great job. Why wouldn't you just pay me? That seems very obvious. You have lots of money. You can afford me. Yet you don't. And it was I think it was the second year. It was the week right before Christmas, and I had to dial for dollars. Like, could you please cut the check? Because otherwise you will never see us again. The second one is a different aspect of the strategic. So one of the things you're going to hear a lot in growth-backed companies and the way VCs look at things is the total addressable market, right? Make up the number that you think this market is worth. And we've all seen this, right? This is where you get the kind of like, we're the Uber of this, and if we get 1% of this $10 quadrillion market, well, look how amazing that is, right? That's like every seed pitch deck ever. Because you don't have enough data to, the technographic insights to be able to understand the customers, the pricing, let alone the product market fit that you're even talking about, so you just make it up. And at Scythe, the initial strategy that I saw was to build an idea, and I felt like I had a pretty good idea because it came from a customer. It was a consulting customer. I saw it as intellectual property, and I made sure to not try to make the mistake of building something that only worked for them and not somebody else. And so while I started to do that, I started going out and talking to other folks to try to round out those requirements and built what I thought was a really cool technology, which turned out to be for a very constrained market. And that limitation was something that it took me 3 years to understand that I'd spent all this time trying to build out this tech. It's like rowing a boat, and I got us to row faster, but not in the right direction. And the good news is you can pivot from that if you're paying attention, but took me longer than 4 to 5 months, I guess, to really understand the better problem to solve where there was already money. Because there's problems that are funded,
Yeah.
and there's just problems. And we were more on that problem side.
The payment issue is one that recurs. I dealt with that as well early as an entrepreneur, especially doing U.S. government stuff. And then I resolved that I would not be that company. I wouldn't be the net 60 or the net 75. I would pay people really quickly. And I had a really great experience where there was a contract for DoD where it was like the options were SAIC or the Terrorism Research Center. And they reached out. They wanted General Van Riper to do something for them. And they're like, oh, we'll pay you through this SAIC channel. He went back to DoD and said, actually, can you engage me through TRC because they actually pay me. So I learned that lesson that people will also affiliate with you more if you treat them well and if you are not creating those problems that you get aggravated by as an entrepreneur.
So not creating problems on top of solving the problems ends up with more business.
Yes.
Okay. just for the time capsule, because you mentioned SVB, and in, I'm going to assume 5 years, no one's going to know what SVB is. So for those future viewers in the year 2027, and we're wondering what SVB is, that was Silicon Valley Bank. In the year 2023, there was a brief blip where we were very worried about that, right? We already have a hard job. The fact that our money in the bank wouldn't be there wasn't supposed to be on the bingo card. So who was affected by that? Just us?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you two avoid it?
No, I didn't have a banking relationship with them. I guess I was affected by it to the extent that I'm an investor in companies that were affected by it, but not directly in my business.
Yeah, we're bootstrapped, and I have no VC investors or relationships from that. The only thing was that whether some of our customers would be able to pay us. But I mean, we were had enough runway, and like we don't have a huge, crazy, big number for pricing. So
Right. So you were more because you're bootstrapped. You had the traditional banking relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we diversify across the bigger banks, and so we don't. Afterwards, I started to relook, and I was like, "Huh, what does SVB do for all these people? That how come I'm not doing any of that?" So it was educational for me, which is actually kind of we've talked about that before. Like coming from a bootstrap perspective, there's a lot of things like the whole everything in the VC world, SVB funding. You're like, I didn't even know that was a topic or a thing, and then you just realize like how uneducated you are. So, yeah.
So Matt, as an investor, because you were infected by investments.
Sure.
That was a hint. That was me, one of them.
There were multiple.
Yeah. So there were multiple investments that. Were you talking to those founders? Were you being stoic on their behalf?
Yeah, in a couple instances for sure, and then also being willing to kind of rally. There was that one weekend that was really key on if there were capital requirements and things of that sort. How could the investment teams kind of rally around the entrepreneurs? So trying to facilitate that almost kind of like direct lending structure. But luckily by the weekend, things were resolved with regards to access to capital, not access to lines of credit, which created a different problem for companies. But so yeah, was that support, talking to folks, there one in particular that I chatted with probably 5 or 6, maybe more times, and then chatting with some of the other investors around the contingency plans to make sure entrepreneurs would be able to meet payroll and pay expenses. And I think we started to get a sense for the fact that it would be resolved with regards to that access to capital issue. So it wasn't going to be a huge risk. It wasn't going to be like you put the money in, you might not get it out. It was going to be, can we put the money in and buy them 30 days, 60 days, whatever the expected mitigation timeline was going to be. It turned out the mitigation was 72 hours. That was convenient.
So Mollie, while you were going through that, what was your life like that March?
I'll just share one story about what was going through my head. So when I opened my SVB bank account and put a little bit of money in it and watch that money grow over time, you try not to think about the day when that money is zero, but it is an hourglass, and you're trying to manage that. And so it was really strange the day that everything did start to open. They unfroze the account, like things were frozen. That was a really scary moment when like things were just frozen. But then they unfroze the accounts, and you could move it from one bank account to another. And watching this number that I had watched every single week, more like all of a sudden go to zero, but not in the way that I had expected it, because it's not zero. It's just moving to a different bank account. It was a really weird feeling as a founder, because you wake up every day thinking, like, our jobs as CEOs is to not run out of money, and you don't, but just to watch that number go to zero in a weird way simulated that feeling that you're trying to avoid. But other than that, I think there were moments of feeling like, if I just do everything I can, like that is enough, and I wasn't. There were times it felt like you should be doing more, because it just seemed like everybody else was doing more, and it's that like comparison game that you're playing. You're like, that person seems really busy. Am I supposed to be more busy? But also, this is the news, and I'm doing the best I can. And
You didn't have the bake sale?
No, I did not have a bake sale. I don't know if bake sale would have gotten us through payroll, unless it was some really good brownies. But anyway, those are some of my experiences. Is that in the end, I think it speaks a little bit more to just like. The reflections you had as a founder, and then maybe a small company should have a little bit better financial discipline and not have everything in one bank account.
Yeah, that's one of those lessons learned afterwards.
Yeah.
Again, the bank wasn't supposed to be the hard part.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the key lesson though too, right? Like as an entrepreneur, you don't want to overburden yourself with contingencies of things to worry about, and that was not supposed to be a factor. And we have this conversation in the cybersecurity space, right? Like, is it reasonable to expect that somebody can implement a cybersecurity posture that will prevent the most advanced APT from penetrating their systems, right? It's like, no, right? Like, you shouldn't have to put yourself in that headspace all the time. Entrepreneurs shouldn't have to put themselves in that headspace all the time. This was kind of a one-off, I don't want to call it a black swan type of event, but it's one of those areas where it's a great lesson learned, but I don't think any entrepreneur can be faulted for not having considered it previously. It just wasn't something that was, within the domain of expertise or even how you would advise a founder. I mean, I kept my money in the same bank. I've worked at the same bank for 24 years on business accounts. Like, I've never thought of diversifying it.
So I guess it was just the sense there was nothing I could do. I adopted the stoic attitude. I remember I was getting yelled at and pushed, and you need to do something, and I was like, literally can't even log into the website. What am I supposed to do? And by that, by the time that it was, because it was late Friday morning, and then the Fed had taken it over, and it was like game over. Like there's no time to do anything. And I'd been flying the day before, so I wasn't even aware until I landed at 4:55 p.m. local time when my phone is like melted down from messages and voicemails and emails, and I was like, oh, okay, apparently something is happening. Did not have that on my bingo card, right? And I remember just kind of going over into the weekend of like, well, what's the worst case scenario here? We start some point in the future, whether it's Monday, whether it's 2 months away Monday, I don't know, with $250K in the account, because that's the FDIC coverage, right? And of course, and I didn't worry about it any further from that angle because there's nothing I can do. There's no busy work to do, right? There's no bake sale that's going to solve this, although you are allowed to sell special brownies in DC, so maybe you could have covered that.
Hitting refresh on your browser, that's still down.
Yeah, it's like buying a ticket to ShmooCon. The money's not going to come up when the ticket's already sold in the first 2 seconds. So I just kind of accepted that, and it all worked out. But the second part that I've learned is I think there are 3 financial components to being a startup, and folks tend, when they look at business, only look at the obvious 2, right? Make money, spend money. Revenue minus what you cost, profit. And of course, as a growth startup, we don't know what profit is, but it's still, the arithmetic is still there. Yeah. But the third part is the strength and belief of your investors, right? As a growth startup, you are having people who trust you to give you money on the belief that you will grow that money in an efficient-ish way, it's made up a word, towards something better. And so in those kind of crises, that's where you know the strength of your investors, where because I reached out to a few and they said, hey, regardless of the situation, this is what we'll do for you. We will keep you solvent, right? And that's, I think, the part about investors is when you take money, it's like getting married. And you're in it for the long haul, right? You're going back to trust. You have to trust these people because if there is a divorce, it's going to be emotional, it's going to be messy, and it's going to be costly.
Or catastrophic.
It can be. That can be the end.
We've seen that in the market recently, right? Where it just, not knowing circumstances, you see some entities where it's like they just go away. And you realize there has to be some core tension between the investors and the founder.
Yeah, one thing to note, though, is I think that as an industry, we are really good at Monday morning quarterbacking everything, right? And we're like, it's possible somebody could have copied your DNA to get through the biometric, like that is a conversation that you're talking to a security practitioner, be like, I can see them having that conversation, right? And so like afterwards, people were like, well, these small businesses should have 15 different bank accounts and have it spread out, and it's like, that's just not reasonable, right? It's just, but I think that, and I think you did it too. You're like, maybe I could have had a little bit better. Like it's just we beat ourselves up as founders, being like, well, technically, maybe I should have 15 different accounts, spread these things around. Like there's a balance because we see, well, they weren't affected because they have a team of 50 people doing finance, and like, it's a different world.
Realistic expectations, right? I had never operated in an environment where you had to have multiple banking relationships. One was enough.
The only time I did was at JP Morgan. Now we had thousands of accounts everywhere, but that's JP, right?
You're JP Morgan.
Yeah, but JP Morgan keeps a lot of money at other banks too, right? Like it's really like the way the banks work is.
I'm
really,
just saying that their revenue model is on being really good at that stuff.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
they naturally would be good at doing that.
Exactly.
Whereas I don't think we're as savvy with money.
Yeah, it's just not realistic. It was an unrealistic, but there were a lot of pundits and people on Monday and Tuesday saying that, well, these startups, that was their risk. All right, if the FDIC limit is $250,000, how many companies is that going to cover payroll for? Like, what does that look like, and how do you balance that out? Like, that might have been good in the when did that limit come up? The 50s?
80s?
Right.
Oh,
like,
50s would have been, you're right, probably 50s.
like that's not even close to any reasonable company today.
As a bootstrap founder, though, we do have 2 bank accounts. You have your
Yeah.
business bank account, and you have your personal savings account that you end up funding.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah,
We get to play with other people's money. So Mollie and I are working with that. And
Yeah.
typically you have 2 bank accounts too, but that's because you have your zero balance account, which is the public for transactions for security purposes, and then your core savings account that you have at the back of it where you hold your reserve.
See, but that's what I mean. Like that actually, when you say that, I'm like, oh, that's actually a really good business practice. I could do something like that. And I'm like, I don't do that. Right? You know,
You should do that.
I should do that.
No,
Like,
you should absolutely do that.
but like, see, that's
Before
what I
this
mean.
video comes out,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just
but-
made yourself a financial target.
I know, but it's this really interesting thing of like being a bootstrap. I'm like, oh no, I got a bank account, I got a savings account with it. You know, I kind of do. But the way you said it like that, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, to make you feel even worse, Anthony, I actually learned to do that as a bootstrapped consultant founder.
Yeah.
So now we're talking to Anthony's future self.
I know.
One week from today.
And then if you're watching, do that right now.
So other than that change, which you're
Yeah.
going to be making shortly, can't hack them. What is something you wish you had done differently? Right? You can't accelerate the product market fit to the problem you had to iterate through. So let's take that one off the table. Right? I wish I knew the answer earlier isn't going to be it.
Can I go last?
Yeah, anybody
I
else?
can
'Cause
go.
that's a
I,
hard
I,
one.
I have an answer. I think when I was starting the company, I was so eager to get out of the phase of just feeling like not a real company. I don't. You know, there's like feeling like just an idea was not a real company. This urgency to hire the first team member, the urgency to bring on outside capital, the urgency to sell the product. And I think that's good urgency. I think that urgency makes for good founders. But one of the advice that I often give to founders when they're sort of in that early stage and maybe they're just a solo founder or maybe they're trying to raise their first round is and how there's a lot you can do at that phase that you can't do as you start to get bigger and as you start to bring on additional people and as you start to bring additional on outside capital. And I think the mistake that I made or the advice that I would give myself is to spend a little bit more time at that phase as just being just being one person and an idea and really trying to focus on like what that looks like and what the plan should look like, and being comfortable in that too, and being comfortable with that little bit of that discomfort that can come because people will be like, that's not a real company, you're one person. And I'm here to tell you that if you have an idea, it's a real company. Like there's no metric out there that says you're only a real company when you have a customer. You're only a real company when you have an outside employee. You're a real company. Everyone, it's my inspirational TED Talk.
Just jumping on that,
Yeah.
the other thing that I think you two may have an opinion on this too, is this is actually the best time as a founder when you're small.
Yeah.
I can remember when we were, a handful of folks for several years, and every single day we would be on the phone talking to each other, solving the problems, working like this, hey, you this, like it was just tight iteration all of the time. And then when you grow, you kind of think, well, I'll have fewer problems because I'm going to have more. And it's the opposite. You have more different problems, and it's harder for you to focus on them. It's a different challenge. This is the best time. It's like, remember when we were growing up? Like, enjoy high school. It's the best time of your life because being an adult sucks. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The home whiteboard moments, I do think, are some of my favorite moments. When those pop up,
Yeah.
you see the memories, like all of the, you start in the morning with like the coffee cups, and then it's like the soda, and then it's the beer, you know, like you can see the progression of the very long brainstorming day. Or with the Terrorism Research Center, our first office was the basement of my townhouse. And the first time we got audited on a government contract, the auditor came to the house.
That's
And my
awesome.
daughter's like crawling around the floor, you know. And, those definitely were magic moments. If I think back to biggest mistake I would do over, and again in the context of like having built multiple businesses over the years, with the Terrorism Research Center, I built an overly diversified business. That was basically 4 companies inside of one, which, you know, maybe no regrets because of the mission focus of what we were doing, but it made things increasingly complex. It was 4 different revenue models, you know, some selling to commercials, some selling to government only, some doing high risk training. Like it was very, very diversified, which made the business for the size that we were overly complex. And we certainly got penalized when it came to valuation because nobody knew how to value the company because they would look at it and be like, I literally had offers to buy the company where like, we'll buy these 3 parts of the business, but we don't want the training, or we'll do this and we won't do that. Like I realized I built something that was like a little bit too diversified, a little bit too complex, and that was definitely a major mistake in that regard. And I course corrected for that. When I got to Fusion X, I was just like, we do this. Like I was very laser focused on making sure that we were known in the market for one thing and we executed against that.
For me, and this is going to sound weird the way I'll say it, but I wish I would have cared less more. And what I mean is that like there are certain conversations I'd have with a customer where or a prospect, and I'm like super amped up, like, and I really care about the outcome, and then you realize like they're just a crappy customer or a crappy prospect. Like somebody said it to me, they're like, you should sell to people who want to buy your stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like actually making sure that they understand what you're trying to do, they value what you're trying to do, and because you can't convince people if they're not there, right? And so I spent a lot of time caring about that. Now you want to be optimistic, well, all that stuff is true, but like I wish I would have cared less a lot more. I would have saved my calendar a lot of time from meetings. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't even be on this one because that is a hope and a prayer conversation that's we're not ready for. So that's what I would say.
It gets more complex to add on to that when you bring one of those customers actually on board.
Yeah.
And you have to go through the process of firing a customer.
Yeah.
Right. I've been through that in each of my businesses where it's just it is definitely not a match. There's not the alignment, and that makes it a really complex conversation to have around that misalignment.
Especially our experience, we had a customer that paid us a lot that we had to fire. And it was a super hard piece of like, okay, they want us to do this. If we get rid of them, we have to make it up with this much revenue, right? And
it goes against that core spirit of entrepreneurship is like, I want the revenue coming in. I need to have customers. When you go and say like, no, this is actually a distraction, or this is a lot of friction, or, for whatever reason it might be, going through that process of trimming out the customers is tough as well.
I don't know if we would have done that differently, but we had to make a strategic choice. An entire class of customer we had cultivated, we were effectively going to fire. Mm-hmm. And that was a hard decision because that was tied to money. Now, the money was the smaller part, but it was the classic example of low revenue, high demand.
yeah,
Right? Like, hey, we don't pay you very much money, but we want everything from you, and why aren't you more responsive? And we're like, you pay like a tenth, because it was a particular class where we were courting, so we gave them a fractional price. And they saw it as like, well, that's what it's worth, and therefore we want everything else from it. So I think there's actually a benefit to where they didn't buy, because if you had managed to overcome them with your charisma in the sale, you would have been saddled with a customer that would have dragged you.
yeah.
My mistake, I think, is prosaic and highlights my total naivete. I met Ron Gula, who's the co-founder of Tenable, in 2017, and we met at a dinner, and we connected, and he's like, oh, like, what are you doing? And I gave him the brief highlight because I thought he was already conflicted out for a reason. And he spent 10 months trying to talk to me. Now, I Heisman'd Ron Gula for 10 months. The blank look isn't fake. I am that stupid. I regret that. I wish I had not done that. I wish I had just followed the, when I first started GREM 10 years ago, I had come out of the intelligence community, the government world, the military world, where I saw we have such an insular view because we think we're so special and look at what we do. And that was my first moment of like, hey, I'm blue ocean, and the only limitations are what I decide in my own life as an entrepreneur or whatever I do. And here was an example where I had intentionally on an assumption done that and limited myself. Now, to his credit or persistence, we were at a conference in New York City, and he was like, "You're having breakfast with me tomorrow." And I was like, "I'm poor. Free breakfasts are good." And that's where it unlocked. And then I met you at Black Hat a few months later.
Yeah, over the whatever frozen Slurpee thing.
Alcoholic frozen Slurpees.
Alcoholic, yes.
I remember those.
Yeah.
Those would be a good bake sale. I guess you can't call that a bake sale if it's a frozen good,
Frozen.
but it would definitely make money. They were very tasty.
Especially a black hat.
Yes.
But just such a simple, stupid mistake that could have saved me so much time. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason I decided to move from being bootstrapped because I incubated the SCYTHE idea inside of GRIM for 2.5 years. I was spending my own money doing it. I was bootstrapping it. But I realized for me, I didn't know what I was doing when it came to commercial software sales. I knew how to build things. My version of charisma was being scary, and that was how I sold. But that's not scalable. That's not how that works. And so I intentionally wanted to go get VCs because I was like, it's worth giving up equity to somebody who's been there and done that, and they can coach me. And here's one of the paragons of the industry who's trying to talk to me, and I wouldn't do it. So that's just tactical mistake that had strategic implications. Now, fortunately, it works out in the end, but man, I was a dummy.
There's a Richard Bach quote from the book Illusions. I always love to argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours. I think we make that mistake as entrepreneurs, where you're like, oh, you had a misconception where you're basically, oh, he's conflicted out, like it's not worth the conversation. I had a similar experience, when I transitioned out of Accenture. I blew off the person that was trying to recruit me because I thought they wanted to have one particular type of conversation. I wasn't interested in that, and I totally missed the mark. So it's like keeping that open-mindedness, I think, about engaging with people is definitely important.
So we all, for better or worse, work in cybersecurity. What is your view of, this is our chance to turn our ire away, right?
Yeah.
Depression is just anger focused inward. Let's focus it outward at the
We're not
industry.
depressed.
So what is something you see out in the industry that you just blows your mind every time?
Good or bad? Are you talking positive or negative?
Bad.
Bad. Okay.
Yeah, let's get them.
Let's get 'em.
Oh, jeez.
I'll go first if you want some time. So the mistake I see, going back to the problem statement, is our industry has an above average intellect. These are engineers, these are educated, these are trained. That's not a comment on whether you have a degree or certification, just you know what you're doing in your space to have a job. To the greater populace, what we do is kind of voodoo magic. Nobody really knows how computers work, and we secure those things. And so what I see in terms of looking at the problem, well, I'm really smart and I know things and I project my assumptions because I'm smart and I extrapolate those. And so I see a lot of the solutions in the market advocating what I call nerd solutions for nerd problems. I think people are the largest component of risk. People are the largest component of the solution. And we get condescending about that, and then we think, here's a technical solution that solves a technical problem, and you don't need to worry about the people. And I see it over and over again, and we keep being surprised that we don't make progress.
So you would say there's a lot of technical solutions out there, but for what are non-technical problems, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say, on my end, once you said that, you start spiraling down like a lot of different issues. I think a lot of times we articulate or advocate that innovation has taken place when it hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a huge detriment to the industry. There's a lot of solutions today that claim to be super differentiated, that you can go back in time 20 years and they're just, a point evolution. So I think when we over-articulate innovation, it becomes hard for people to take the industry writ large as seriously because they see, once you start to look, that lack of innovation that exists.
I think there's two things, and this is going to sound really rough, so forgive me. I know.
Let's go.
He needs more chapstick.
I know. I'm almost there. So one, the cybersecurity industry has a level of hubris that is just unparalleled compared to any other industry. Like if you look at the number of CISOs who go to get wined and dined and dinners and events, like this doesn't happen to CIOs and CTOs at this scale. We know because we track all these events. And like there were 1,800 cybersecurity conferences and events last year, 1,800, which is an insane number, right? And we're on track to have more this year, right? And that doesn't include a lot. So there's no other C-level executive that gets wined and dined like that. And then in the same breath, there's a big difference between what I call a little c and a big C when we talk about the word CISO, right? There are some CISOs who are very much, I should be at the board table and I'm going to tell them all about the vulnerabilities. And I'm like, you shouldn't be at the board table because you're going to talk about vulnerabilities. So understanding the difference between a big C and a little c, it's really, really fascinating. And then, like I said, that's the same group that gets, hey, we're going to have this crazy party and spend all of this. Like, CIOs don't go to that, right? It's very, very different. So those are the two things I would say.
My experience, let's see, when I left the NSA and founded a company, the story that I told myself was like, this is amazing. I'm on this big mission. This is so exciting. I went to my first Black Hat, and they're like, oh, you're just a vendor. And there was quite a culture shock in that respect to be like, whoa, I thought I was walking I thought I was going from DoD and just getting to protect government systems and getting to be on a bigger stage and help more people, and all of a sudden you have a target on your back and people don't want to talk to you. And I think that there are many things that we can and there are stories that go about just like crazy things that vendors have done, of which you have mentioned. But I think that we sometimes do antagonize vendors a little bit too much from maybe what the core mission is that they're trying to help the space. And I do think that the people on the security teams are real heroes, and vendors are trying to help them. But I was just shocked in the beginning with that type of dynamic, and have always tried to build real relationships with people in spite of it. But that was just one of the things that it's very noisy about. It's a noisy space, and then it's noisy about how noisy it is, I guess, is maybe the way of putting it.
There's a few CISOs, I won't say them, they're cyber execs in general, that will on LinkedIn talk about like, I can't believe all these people are cold calling me, reaching out, and doing all this stuff. And I make it a point to tell them how many call centers they have, right? Be like, oh, hey, you're complaining about all these vendors. You have 2,000 people in your company that literally do that exact same thing, right? And then, oh yeah, but that's not, that's your business too, right? Like we live in an exchange business, right? Or a world. And it was weird for me when I transitioned over, same thing. People are like, oh, you're a vendor. I'm like, oh, no. But they see you don't have a big fortune name on you, and suddenly you get the V.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we need to remember. This industry has grown so quickly that we have so many people that are on like the full spectrum of the journey.
Yeah.
Whether they're vendors in the early stages or late stages, or CISOs in the early stages or late stages. And I have to remind myself of this as well. I was guilty of it today at the CISO Summit here at Black Hat, where there's a presentation on stage, and I'm just like, it's like, I've heard that stuff before, but I have to remember I've been in this space for almost 30 years, and I happen to be almost a subject matter expert on what they're talking to. The person sitting next to me is the head of security for like a plumbing and HVAC company, and they're getting a tremendous amount of value from that. So I think we have to remember that there is going to be a repeat element. There are going to be people along the complete spectrum of their journey in this field, just because we've needed to scale so rapidly to address the problems. I think that if there's one thing I think as a community we need to be reminded of, that's one of those aspects of it.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot. I'll talk about that a lot, is the youth of this industry. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean us, who are a little bit on the other side of youth. Three of us. That's a good thing, because I mean, at our level, we get when did you get into cybersecurity? And it's like, it wasn't cybersecurity then. That's kind of a new thing.
I remember when that happened. They were like,
I remember when that happened too.
change your resume. Like, what? What are you talking about?
Like, I can remember the distinct milestones, almost like the way archaeologists go back and look over hundreds of millions of years. Only I'm like, over this is 20 years, right? 2000 plus or minus is when firewalls became commercially everywhere. Think about that. A little more than 20 years ago, your network was not different from my network from the way we defended it. Then, to me, the next one is Target in 2012 created the Cambrian explosion of all of the money that went into this space, because that was the time that business said, oh no, this is more than AV and firewall. We get what you nerds have been saying is there wasn't even a little C that even existed to say it, but what the nerds were saying were vulnerability, 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 and weren't talking business, so it didn't break through that. Until, of course, the Black Swan event happened, and everyone was like, oh, that actually doesn't look like a black swan. That looks like something that could happen to all of us.
It's funny because if you think about like early 2000s, I distinctly remember every person in security, you would go give talks to wherever just so you could talk about it. You'd come back and tell people, hey, I gave this talk. Right? I remember driving 90 minutes and I talked to like 10 auditors at a thing, right? And we just kept doing this because we were learning about the space, creating the energy. And then vendors were like, hey, I'll pay for that dinner. And it just grew from like security practitioners wanting to talk and educate and learn and coming back and be like, oh, I heard about this. And then vendors were like, actually, do you want to go to this concert instead? Or, you know what, we just got the singer at this venue instead. Why don't you just come here? Like, that's literally, you can kind of see the trajectory. So you're right. It's not that like we were malicious or bad, but those of us who've been around since then were like, no, I remember driving forever to go give a talk because the only people who wanted to listen to me were like 10 random auditors.
The first time the title CISO was put on a business card was 1999, right?
Well, there you go. There's another historic mark. Yeah. So the final lightning round here is, what is the thought you want to leave the audience with?
I'll start. Okay.
There you go.
So actually, someone asked me this before, something similar. I would leave with this: you're not alone, and you're enough. Like, people would ask me, like, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be? And I said it would be the sense that our personal feelings of inadequacy, and I think that comes into full display and realization as a founder. Like, if you're going to go start a business, you're like, that's not enough of an idea. Like, it very well could be an awesome idea, right? And like, you are enough and you're not alone in how you feel. And I think that if we kind of get over that, you'd see some awesome companies come out, like awesome ideas.
The biggest amount of feedback I ever got at a Black Hat presentation was I had a slide where I said everybody in cybersecurity has imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize, even the people who've been in it for 30 years still have imposter syndrome. Right?
100%.
So if you're having it as somebody new in the field or a new CEO, it's perfectly natural. And it's going to stay with you.
Yeah.
Let's see, the one, so that I'm not just echoing what you just said, which is a great point. The one that I was thinking of, my parting thought would be, spent a lot of time early on focusing on how to build a company based on what other people had said of how you should build a company. You know, I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, the founder has to sell the first 10 deals before you hire a salesperson, or you need to have 3 customer references before you do before you launch. Like these little tidbits, and I have had to unwind some of those learnings and just rely on the intuition that you have because you're enough, and being willing to go outside of the equation, going outside the textbook, going outside the formula, and do what's best for your business in the moment. And so I would say, the parting thought is more around just following your intuition and not feeling you can do something just because someone else told you that that's how you have to do it.
I will take it full circle back to the passion element. There's a quote I put in my newsletter, and I'll mess it up, with the paraphrase here a little bit, but it basically is like, don't try and go and figure out what the world needs. Figure out what makes you excited and go do that, because what the world needs is people that are excited. So if you have the passion, you should be out there pursuing it. I talk with a lot of people who want to be founders. They've got the idea, they're thinking about launching a company, and a lot of them will ask me, like, well, when do you know? When should I start the company? Is it the right time? And I was like, if you have to ask me that question, it's not the right time. When you feel it, like when you can't think about doing anything else, right, then you know that you've got that full engagement from a passion perspective.
And so my closing thought off of the passion, going back to the grit, is the metaphor I've always had in my head, is it's like being a predator in the Serengeti. You start off alive, and you're powerful, and you're passionate with your thing, but there's no food, and there's no water, and the only thing that keeps you going is your will, right? You are enough. And by believing in that, there will be a rainy season, and you will feast, and you will not be thirsty until you will again. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.